Evolutionary.org Hardcore episode 206 is coming your way. Today we're going to debate short versus long steroid cycles by Euro Pharma. So this is going to be a good one. You guys like the steroid talk? We're going to get into steroids. We're going to kind of go over short versus long steroid cycles. We're going to talk about how to understand esters. We're going to talk about example of short and long cycles and why Euro Pharma is a great choice. Let me remind everyone first, though, we are on Apple, we are on Spotify. The algorithms don't like our podcast. We talk about stuff that nobody else has the balls to talk about. That's why we're an underground podcast. And look, at the end of the day, we are an organic podcast. We grow this podcast the right way. We don't buy followers. We don't talk about clickbait. We don't try to make controversies or these fake wars with other bodybuilders like these other guys do, where they make a deal. Hey, let's have a beef with each other so we can get lots of clicks and people can talk about us. We don't do that. We grow this podcast through knowledge and experience, and this is what it's all about. So we are an organic podcast. Our community, the Evo community, is all part of our podcast. You are part of the podcast as well. So if you really like what we're trying to accomplish here, make sure you're liking, subscribing, really spreading the word on this. That's how we're going to grow this channel. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about defining a short versus long steroid cycle. So Mobster, I'm going to get first crack at this one because you had a lot to say on the pre-show.
Right, Steve. So there's examples on the forum where I've seen people talk about running PEDs, steroids specifically, for up to 25 weeks, which to me is just mind blowing. Equally, myself and Dylan Gamelli is a good example, Steve, of arguing the benefits of running orals for more than 4 weeks. Dylan's argued for 4 weeks, and I said, look, semantics, mate. Honestly, when it comes to the idea of orals being run for more than 4 weeks, I've run orals many times for 8 weeks. Ironically, in more recent years, I've actually cut back to 4 weeks because I've been able to get something from those 4 week cycles. One of the ideas, I mean, look, right, there's going to be for and against with regards to what we might call short, high intensity cycles. You could run mild cycles. We could look at what pros are doing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we've got to argue here the difference between the two in terms of what makes a short cycle and a long cycle. And we'll talk about that momentarily. And also why we might run short cycles briefly, why the reasons for doing so, the benefits for doing so, versus, for argument's sake, the reasons why many people prefer longer cycles. And I'll just use myself as an example, and I'll bring Steve in for the same reason. So, for example, Steve, as I just said, I've run training cycles where the last 4 weeks, and this is now, I don't really compete anymore, so it's just for me to reach a peak level of strength. I've run both injectables and or orals for short periods of time, 4 weeks, as I said, with the idea of tipping myself over into new personal records, new peaks of strength. Equally, there's arguments, for example, of running 8, 12, 16 weeks, perhaps not 25 weeks. I find that too much of a stretch. With the idea, for example, of, as we used to call these things, gains sticking. Let me give you an example, and this is more historically. And I've literally just been reading this the last few days and arguably refreshing the thought process behind some of the very high dosage but very short period of times, aka the short high intensity cycles that were sort of put out into the ether by the late Paul Morrison, writing as one of his pseudonyms, which was James Stettler, Steve. And the process here was where he would have you train as you should, very hard, eat exactly the kind of foods you should be eating, high dose protein, and so on and so forth, with the idea of obviously pushing up your body weight and adding shitloads of muscle. And what he would argue, Steve, was that if you cannot afford, and most people can't, it has to be said, to run high doses of steroids for long periods of time, as we seem to see in the modern age, and especially in competing bodybuilders, you're aiming, as per these shows, we talk about competing bodybuilders, but what we're really talking about is what most people can do and how long they can afford it. So here's his argument. He would have you fill up your freezer with steak, and tuna, and chicken, and turkey breast, and so on and so forth. All the high protein choices that we would normally use. And then he would have you go out and slowly, over the next 2, 3, 4 months, stock up on all the PEDs you were going to use. And he said, if you can't afford to run 3, 4 months of these high dosages, what you can do is go absolutely crazy for 4 weeks, 28 days, 30 days sometimes. But the idea being that you really, really push your body, anabolically speaking, both with PEDs and with food, for a very short period of time. Now, what you're really doing, of course, is you're having a run up, as I would do in training. You ease off, and then slowly you build up the volume, if you're a bodybuilder, the weights and volume, if you're a bodybuilder or a strength athlete. So when you're getting close to that kind of territory where it's going to be new growth, new muscles being stimulated, then you bring in, for a short period of time, ridiculous levels of anabolics. And I'll just give you some examples here. One of the books I've read, I just gave that back to my buddy this morning, had you using 500 milligrams of sustanon per fucking day, between 100 and 150 milligrams, and this is for short periods of time within the cycle, Steve, of Winstrol. He didn't specify it was oral injectable. There are other examples, and actually one of them, ironically, was probably close to what some bodybuilders are doing now, but it was higher for back in the day, which was 1,000 milligrams plus of tren, and so on and so forth. The argument being thus: you're going to be suppressed. You're going to have a, arguably, especially when it comes to tren, kind of toxic impact on your body. The high doses of orals, some of the numbers they were talking about, Steve, blew my mind in terms of just how fucked your endocrine system, and especially your liver, etc., is going to feel. But his thought process was something along the lines of, A, you're just really going to get into that kind of super anabolic, put loads of muscle on very quickly. And if you are going to push your ability to recover, you are going to push your liver, well, then you might as well do that, but only do it for a short period of time. Now, here's the advantages, and we can talk about, and I'll let Steve come in for some thoughts on that, and also talk about the longer cycles. One of the arguments to be made here, Steve, and I've done this in the past when we talked 4 to 8 week cycles, is that assuming, and when we talk S, esters, there'll be a reason for that as well. Assuming that you do 4 weeks of this crazy high level stuff, then you would have 8 to 12 weeks off. And arguably, if you time it right, you might be able to push 3, possibly 4, depending upon the overall length of these kind of high intensity short periods of time, then 8 to 12 weeks off, and you might be able to get 3, possibly 4 of these cycles into a year. He would argue that's 3 or 4 as close to competition bodybuilding, pushing yourself anabolically as much as possible per year, versus, for example, and again, I'll use the most extreme example here, 1 single 25-week cycle, and then having to have something ridiculous. And again, this depends on the esters and the products being used, anywhere between 12 and 25 weeks or more off. So what do you think on that kind of thought process, just in terms of the 4 weeks and the 8-week cycles? And then we can talk about maybe the benefits also and the definition of a longer cycle.
Yeah, a couple points on that. I hate that term cycle. I hate it that people talk about. They're like, oh, I'm running a cycle. I've been on for a year. How is that running a cycle? Most situations, people do use the term correctly, but in a lot of situations, people don't, especially nowadays. Steroid access is easier than ever.
Yeah.
Steroids are more economical than ever.
Yes.
We've
Yes.
gotten used to having side jobs where we have, income on the side. Everybody's
Yep.
doing something else. Everybody's doing another. So we have extra money where we can afford steroids today.
Let me just jump in here for a second, Steve, and to echo your thoughts. I've actually said on multiple shows, and actually when I looked at the cycles and some of the numbers, I remember the prices from back in the day, and I've stated this on other shows. To be clear, in real terms, we pay less now than we've ever paid on a milligram for milligram basis. We have more access to PEDs than we've ever had before. Lots of those books that I've been referring to talk about specific pharmaceutical companies. We don't do that anymore. We don't need to do that anymore. The whole fakes is pretty much what we're buying. We are not buying big names, for example, pharmaceutical company brands like Ciba. We're not buying Ciba. We are buying companies that we approve, like Euro Pharmacies, that produce great products. But are they a licensed pharmaceutical giant producing chemicals for the mass market and over the counter products? No, they are not. They are specifically focused on producing high quality steroids. But again, in real terms, and I mean absolute real terms, any argument you can talk about whatsoever, the prices we pay are better. Silly example that came up on the forums just this week was someone talking about going to Mexico and paying $120. I think I've seen examples of this and I've mentioned it on shows for a single vial of underdose tests. And you go, what the fuck are you paying that price for? Because we can talk about companies like Euro Pharmacies on the forums all the time, and their prices are seriously a fraction of what they were 20, 30
Yeah.
years ago. So it's just ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of the
So,
stuff,
yeah, if you don't
reason for
mind, yeah.
some of this stuff from, yes, reason for some of this stuff from before is because people had to save the fuck up. And you could probably
Yeah.
run, if you had to
Yeah.
spare money in that, you can almost do it every month. Yeah.
Yeah, so my point is, sort of like what you said, people used to have to save just to do a 4 or 5 week cycle. Now people can run 20, 25 week quote unquote cycles. That's not cycling. So when you go on steroids for 20 to 25 weeks, you got to count the ester clearance. A lot of these steroid esters will take 5 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks to clear your system. So you got to add, if you're going 25 weeks, it takes 10 weeks to clear your system. That's a 35 week on. That's not cycling. Then you'll come off and you'll do the 6 week PCT and then you'll go back on. Again, that's not cycling steroids. Let's just call it what it is. It's abusing steroids. It's staying on steroids. So
Yes.
you're really
Yes.
never even coming off. So let's call it what it is. So don't call it cycling. So when we're talking about that, you've got to factor in the ester clearance. So it's important when you're talking about true cycling that you're making a commitment to do time on versus time off times two to give your body a chance to properly recover. That means if you do a 12-week cycle, you're coming off for 24 weeks. That's truly cycling because you're giving those esters a chance to clear, you're giving the PCT a chance to work, and then you're giving your body a chance to recover. It's not just about recovering your reproductive system. A lot of you will say, well, Steve, I'm on TRT. I don't care. I don't need to do time on, time off because I'm on TRT anyway. So I'll just cruise on my TRT dose. Well, it does matter because you still have to recover your health. You have to recover your organs. Your kidneys need a break. Your liver needs a break. Your heart needs a break. Your skin needs a break. Your hair needs a break. Your brain needs a break. Everything in your body needs a break. You can't just stay on high amounts of hormones and be pumping yourself full of hormones for a long period of time and not expect a backlash from your body. You'll start noticing insomnia problems. You'll start noticing over time you might have, other issues, sexual issues that come up that you didn't have previously. And it's because you're abusing steroids and you're not taking your time off. You still have to take your time off, even if you make the decision to go on TRT and cruise from a health perspective. I've seen the blood work. Staying on steroids for long periods of time will increase your chance of stroke and blood clots. And there's a lot of silent things that go on in the body that can occur as well. So that's overdoing it when it comes to long steroid cycles. But what about underdoing it? On the flip side, a short cycle that is too short is a waste of time because it takes even oral steroids time to build up and peak in your system. So I'll give you an example. Even if you're doing an oral, even if you're doing a short injectable ester like propionate, which we're going to talk about in the next segment about how to understand esters, you'll still need a few days to 1 to 2 weeks for it to build up in your system. So let's say, you use testosterone propionate, for example, and you're looking at a 3 day half-life. So it's going to take about, you know, 12 to 15 days to reach peak in your system. So if you only run it for 4 weeks, it's going to take 2 weeks for it to even peak in your system. Then you run it, so you're only going to have peak concentrations for about 2 weeks. And then when you stop using it, you'll have it's still in your system for 2 additional weeks. So as you could see here, you're going to have 4 weeks of that cycle is going to be less than peak levels in your system, and only 2 weeks of that will be peak levels. So it really doesn't make any sense to go too short as well. We used to have a guy on the forum who used to say, "Oh, I can run a steroids for 2 or 3 weeks," and you're talking about long ester steroids. 2 to 3 weeks is still working in my body, and it's like, what are you talking about? They're not even building up enough to work in your body. They're not going to do anything for you. To run Primo or Equipoise or long ester testosterone for 2 or 3 weeks isn't going to do shit for you. That doesn't make any sense because it won't even come close to reaching peak concentrations. Each time you inject on a proper schedule, the concentration gets higher and higher and higher until it reaches a peak level where just as much esters are leaving your system as they are entering your system. That is by definition the peak time. And the peak time will come 4 to 5 times the half-life. So we're going to talk about that in the next segment. Anything else you want to add when it comes to defining a short versus long steroid cycle, Mobster? And let me just kind of give it the crux. A short cycle in my mind is anything 8 weeks or less.
Yes.
And then a long cycle would be anything 14 weeks or longer. So anything in between that would kind of be intermediate to me. Like 8 to 14 weeks
Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
intermediate.
Yeah.
And then more than 14. That's what I think. How about you?
I agree, Steve. I think that if we look on the forums and if we literally had a poll on this show, I guarantee you that the great and vast majority of PED users, of steroid users, are doing 8 to 12 week cycles, pushing it out to 16 weeks. And that seems to be the average. So it's what's less than the average and what's more than the average. I would also agree in regards to certain points that Steve's made with regards to ester clearance and so on and so forth. Just by way of an example, and I've mentioned this on other shows before, I was somewhat foolish, bearing in mind we do these shows, with regards to my thinking, forgetting that a sustanon and decacycle that I was on was still in my system. As Steve said, it had reached peak concentration. I finished the cycle and was kind of slightly confused as to why I was still hitting very, very close to my PBs on bench press 2, even 3 weeks after the cycle. And then, of course, for fuck's sake, Mobster, you know that there's short, medium, and long acting esters and sustanon. The longer esters are still in your system. They reach peak concentration just before you finish the cycle. For fuck's sake, of course, they're still having an effect on your body. Of course, you're still hitting BBs. One of the points I want to make here, Steve, and it occurred to me as you were talking, and this is specifically why we're going to talk about esters and so on. One of the issues in the past, which I don't think applies now, but it might confuse people when they're putting together a cycle, and it's quite often why people will come on the forums and say, what do you think? And then people like Steve will have to point out what they're doing in regards to their choice of esters. Again, back in the day, there might have been an argument to be made for you not being able to find the product you want. Let's say, for argument's sake, you couldn't find a certain version of Trend, Steve. And even in more recent times, if you're used to using a certain brand that isn't Euro Pharmacies, they might not have the ester version that you want. So one of the issues that sometimes occurs is that people will put together a testosterone-based cycle or a trend-based cycle and so on and so forth. But they're not considering, as Steve quite correctly said, whether that's the right ester to use for a shorter cycle versus a longer cycle. It would make sense, and I've even talked about competition stacks here, Steve, where I said competition stacks can consist of longer acting esters at the beginning and shorter acting esters at the end, purely and simply because they have that ability to manipulate the variables that much quicker. I mentioned at the beginning of the show, saying that if a person's not used to use, for example, Tren again, that if you, and we say this on the forums all the time, if you've never used Tren, use the ACE version of Tren. Because if you fucking hate the side effects, you've only got it in your system for a short period of time. But if you use the enanthate version, it's in that much longer, and you're going to have to struggle with. Yeah. So, like I was saying, Steve, you've got to make sure that the choices you make are appropriate to the length of cycle that you're on, regardless, as Steve said, which is an important aspect as well, regardless of the length of time that you're going to be coming off for. Make sure, for example, Steve, it would make no sense, scientifically speaking, PED choice speaking, to have a short cycle with very long acting esters. Equally, it would make no sense to have a long cycle, 16, 20 weeks plus, where it was all short esters. That makes no sense. And yet people have done that because it's almost been based on what they could get hold of versus the reality being able to choose, as you can with Euro pharmacies, the right product for what you're doing. Again, sometimes, and this is the reason why we do this, sometimes it's a question of what people have put out there on Reddit, for example, or Gym Buddy, or even me citing a book that's 15 or 20 years old. And again, it was a question of what the guys could get hold of at that time, especially if they were trying to use a pharmaceutical product from a pharmaceutical company in Iran, for example, literally waiting for that product to become available, getting it into their country, being able to use it versus the accessibility that we have now. So sometimes we will see cycles like this, as I've just described, made up of arguably the wrong choices. And then 100%, I got to say that I agree with Steve. If you do a longish cycle and you use long-acting esters and then you're only off for a short period of time and then you're back on again, there's no health aspect to it. There's no sort of longevity that you are arguably still on, and so on and so forth. Just as a way of example, Steve, even with the short high-intensity cycles that I described earlier, they were doing the 4 to 6 weeks off and then straight back on again. So arguably, they wasn't even allowing for 8 weeks, which we would discuss as a better option. Remember again, listeners, it's fun to talk about this crazy stuff and what people used to do, and even sometimes what they do now. But what we try to do is give you the best advice for the majority of listeners, which includes things like adding muscle, getting stronger, but also looking after your health, thinking about your endocrine system, thinking about your testicular health, and so on and so forth. So yeah, we talk about these things, we discuss these things, we give you these options, but make sure you're making the right choices in this particular regards.
So this segment here, we're going to kind of go over esters, and Mobster's going to kind of chime in and tell us what Euro Pharmacies has available with each. And that's going to be really cool because you can kind of listen to this, pause, go check out what Euro Pharmacies has, and if it's something that you're interested in, you can order it. So let's start with a suspension and base. This is no ester. It's in and out fast. No ester attached. It's going to be in and out of your body in the same day. This is great for those of you who are tested athletes who don't want to get caught. Some people like to use these as a pre-workout because they peak quick in your system. So you can inject it before your workout and it's going to be peaking in your system during your workout. But they're not good for most others because nobody wants the pin so much. At the end of the day, you're just going to become a pin cushion. And at the end of the day, why not just use one of the other esters that's in your system 24/7? This is not. It's going to be in your system within hours in some cases. So, Mobster, you want to chime in? Euro Pharmacies, what do they have when
Yeah,
it comes to suspension and base? We're talking about test suspension and also trend no ester, TNE.
yeah. So I'm looking here, Steve. They've got a Tren acetate, which is a very short version, testosterone propionate, which is a shorter version. I'm
Yeah, but
looking
we're going to
also.
talk about those next. Yeah, but they don't. What do they have with the testosterone?
I'm looking specifically the Euro Pharmacy's website, Steve, and they don't have a test no ester. I know they have in the past,
Yeah.
and I'm not seeing a testosterone
Okay.
suspension anymore. But again, I know that they have in the past.
No, I see. Actually, I just pulled it up right now, buddy. I think you were probably looking at the wrong page, but if you actually search for this is actually good that Mobster pointed that out. If you actually search for testosterone and just put testosterone base, don't put test base, don't put TNE, put testosterone base, it'll actually come up and it's showing us 50 milligrams per milliliter, 10 milliliter vial. So they do have it available. So if you're interested in trying that out, it's something you could definitely check out on their
Very
website.
quickly, then,
Mhm.
Steve, something that we've discussed on previous shows and the reasons why. Steve just mentioned one thing, and I'll mention the other one. The first thing that Steve mentioned, of course, was quick in, quick out of your system, which actually can be sometimes useful if you're going to be tested. And the other one, Steve, which we discussed, is that lifters more than bodybuilders, and I will say obviously bodybuilders as well for the reasons I said earlier. Lifters will sometimes use a short version of the product at high dosage, literally pre-competition. to give themselves a massive testosterone boost. And I'm thinking specifically of certain orals and a couple of injectables that the day before or the morning of a competition to give you that extra level of aggression. I did mention earlier on bodybuilders using the shorter esters, as I said to you, in competition stacks because of the benefits of being able to manipulate the variables. And what I'm looking at here, really, Steve, is the last 2 weeks, where, for example, and especially if you're working with a prep coach or a coach of any definition, but a prep coach specifically, they will want to see how your body responds as you're getting leaner and leaner and leaner, condition, and so on and so
Yeah.
forth.
And a lot of times people will use the base with a regular steroid cycle just to get an extra boost. But again, if you're a tested athlete, that would be an example. Now, next one is what you touched on, Mobster, propionate. You're looking at about a 2 to 3 day half life. And look at, when it comes to these half lives, a lot of people like to argue this all the time. And it just depends on the type of oil that's being used. It depends on your body. These are just estimates, guys, So when we say 2 to 3 day half life, it may be shorter, it may be longer. It just depends. Everybody's a little different, and it depends on what oil you're using. But this is a popular option for flexibility since it will peak in your system faster, but also be out of your system faster. So a lot of bodybuilders will like to use Pro because it kicks in quicker, but also like to use it toward the end of a cycle. This way, when they stop using it, for example, test probe, you stop using the test probe and it'll be out of your system quicker. Now, when we're talking about the title of this podcast, short versus long esters, this would be an example of something you would want to use, Mobster, in a short cycle. Because if you're running a cycle for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, the propionate is going to be peaking your system within a week and a half, and then you're going to be able to enjoy it for most of your cycle. So that would be a great option. If you use testosterone cypionate for an 8 week cycle, it's not going to peak until week 6 or week 7. So you'll only be able to enjoy it for a week or two. It doesn't make any sense. It's like dating the woman of your life. You can only make love to her. You take her for a 5 day vacation, but you can only make love to her for the last day that you're there, and then you never could see her again. Don't you want to make love to her, Mobster, for 4 out of the 5 days? You don't want to make love to her for just the last day. Or maybe in your case, I mean, I don't know. Maybe in your case, you're different.
I've done both, Steve. It's all good, mate. All in
All right.
one day,
So
many
what?
times, and then many times over many days. It's all good.
So what does Euro Pharma have when it comes to probe? Because you have testosterone probe, you have trenbolone probe. No, no, you don't have trenbolone probe. You have masteron probe. What
Yeah.
probe options do they have?
Well, as you said, I'm looking specifically right now the testosterone probe, Steve. And again, look, we've got blends in here which will have testosterone prop in it. I'm looking at the short of just let me give you examples here, Steve, of short versus long. Nandrolone phenylpropionate is the shorter version, as we know, of Deca. Sustanon, for example, which is a blend
Yeah, we're
of
gonna
the
get to that in a
combination.
second. But
Yeah,
let's just what do they have with probe? They have the testosterone probe. They have the masteron probe.
I'm literally looking at Steve, as you said, of the pro. I can't see any of the propionates here. Looking at the
Yeah,
product page that we was referring.
yeah.
Yeah,
Go
just
ahead.
for example, with regards to testosterone propionate, we're looking at 100 milligrams a mil there. And again, there's a reason why these products are lower dosed for the shorter in, shorter out stuff, as Steve said earlier on. In terms of the masteron propionate liquid, Steve, we're looking at, again, 100 milligrams a mil. I've seen versions, and I think they've even had this when they did the 15 mil vials of 75 milligrams per mil. But again, that was for a bigger amount of product overall with the 15 mil vials, which are now discontinued. So we're looking again here, Steve, for example, longer acting esters, as an example here, compare the masteron propionate, 100 milligrams, as I just said. The longer ester here, masteron enanthate, is 200 milligrams a milliliter. Again, why are these products dosed slightly differently? Because of the quicker in, quicker out variables and the amounts that you'd be putting in a shorter period of time. And this is, again, why we do this now versus the suggestion, as I said earlier on, of the way that people were thinking back in the day, the very high dosages and short periods of time. I'd also perhaps look at this, Steve, from the basis of the PIP that people used to get with high dose products and the sheer volume of product that you would have to put in back in the day in order to get to some of the numbers that were suggested versus the way that people run cycles now. As I said earlier on, this is a question of what people do now and the way that we think now and the way that we structure cycles now
Yeah.
versus the idea of how we structure cycles. Just as an example, Steve, the idea of using 150 milligrams a day of Winstrol, what was the one I mentioned earlier on? 500 milligrams per day, I think for day 1 to 15 of a 30-day short cycle
Yeah.
of sustenance per fucking day.
Yeah,
I
we're
don't
gonna get
even
into
want to
sustanon in a
know.
second. Let's go. Let's kind of keep this in order. Acetate, just like propionate, 2 to 3 day half life approximately. It's gonna be in your out system quicker. If you want a
Yep.
shorter cycle, like let's say you want to run trenbolone, instead of running trenbolone enanthate, you're gonna run trenbolone acetate for a short
Yep.
cycle. Let's say you
Yes.
want it's your first time using tren. This is the first time I used Trend. This is what I did. I did the smart thing. I only did it for 6 weeks. I used the ACE. It's in your system quicker. It's out of your system quicker. So
Yep.
that when you deal with the side effects, it's not going to linger. The side effects won't linger for weeks and weeks after you stop. So Euro pharmacies, they have Trend ACE, and that's a
Yes.
really
100
good,
milligrams. Yep.
and that's a good
100
option.
milligrams a mil, Steve. It's also in their cutting mix, 300, 100 milligrams a mil again. But there'll be other
So
combinations in that
some
recipe.
people will push the Prop and ACE to 10 weeks, but really 8 weeks seems to be the sweet spot if you're doing a shorter cycle. That would be a beautiful option. If you're going to go 10 weeks, 12 weeks, you may want to move on to some of the more intermediate esters like enanthate. And enanthate is an intermediate ester. 6 to 8 day
What
half-life.
what also, Steve, about, and you and I have discussed this on other shows, and bearing in mind that there are options here, the idea of using, and again, this comes down to how you like a product, how well it works for you, and so on and so forth. There's zero to say that you can't use a kickstart, if you like, by using a shorter acting ester to
You
begin
can,
with,
yeah.
just to get things moving.
So
And
just
then, especially if it's 8 to 12 weeks, you just after the first couple of weeks, switch to the inactivate version.
so the Prop and the acetate, you want to be injecting them. A lot of people like to inject them daily or every other day. I make the argument you can even get away with injecting every 2 to 3 days. You'd be perfectly fine. Because especially when it reaches peak in your system, you'll be fine. Now, when they enanthate, 6 to 8 day, and Euro Pharmacies has enanthate, if you want to go over that, Mobster. This is a popular option in a lot of cycles. Enanthate's very smooth. You only have to inject it twice a week. Okay. And a lot of people will like to use enanthate in an 8 week, 10 week, 12 week cycle.
Yep.
It's more in the middle. So what does your pharmacies have when it comes to enanthate?
I would argue, Steve, that testosterone inactivate is probably the favorite version in the great and vast majority of cycles that I've ever seen. And we're looking at testosterone inactivate from Euro Pharmacies with 250 milligrams a mil. Honestly, Steve, and people will have their favorites and people have their specific and individual responses. But you and I have done shows on the most popular selling orals, the most popular selling versions of steroids. And I think we said number one and number two of the injectables has to be the enanthate and the cypionate versions of testosterone,
Yeah.
both of which are
And
available
and
in Euro
Cypionate is the
Pharmacy.
next one I was going to talk about. You're talking about an 8 to 10 day half life, very popular option. Those who are long term or for TRT, you could do once a week. If you're doing it in a cycle, a lot of people like to do twice a week. So
Yep.
if you're going to do a 12 week, 14 week, maybe 16 week cycle, Cypionate is a good option. It's going to take some time to build up in your system though, because it has that longer half life. So the rule with the half life is you multiply the days by 4 or 5. So in the long case scenario, let's say Cypionate has a 10-day half-life, right? Which is a long end. I've seen numbers 11, 12 days as well, but let's go with 10 to keep it easy. And we're talking about 5 day, multiplying that by 5, okay? To give you the amount of time it's going to take to reach peak in your system and the amount of time it's going to take to leave your system. That's 50 days. We're talking about 40 to 50 days, Mobster, potentially, that it will take Cypionate to reach peak in your system. So again, if you're going to run Cypionate for 6 weeks, for 8 weeks, not a good idea. Go with something else because again, it's going to take 40 or 50 days potentially to reach peak. And then when it leaves your system, it's also going to take 40 to 50 days to leave your system. So if you're like, oh, I'm going to run it just for 8 weeks because I want to keep the cycle short, you're not keeping the cycle short. Again, it takes 40 to 50
Yeah.
fucking days
See.
when you stop. So you're not taking
Yes.
it short. So I laugh at these people who are like, oh, I'm going to run these steroids for a short amount of time. I'm so proud of myself. I'm running short cycles. I'm like, no, you're not, because it's in your system literally
Yes,
double the
yes,
amount of time you thought that
yes.
you were running the cycle. So your
That's why
logic
you
doesn't make any sense.
need, yeah, you absolutely must choose the right ester version of the steroid you're going to use for the cycle that you're doing and understand, as Steve's just said, 100% how long it's going to be in your system for. Let me make a quick point here,
Yeah.
Steve, and we can talk a bit more about steroids as
Well,
well.
tell us what your pharmacies has with test sip.
Well, Cypionate, and I'm looking right at it right now, Steve. I've actually used this product, and I've still got some of this product left. Testosterone cypionated, 200 milligrams a milliliter. I would argue, as I said earlier on, it's probably number one or number two of their testosterones selling on Euro pharmacies. So yeah, it's a great product. Used it myself many times. Zero pip. I'm on TRT right now. This is my cypionate, my TRT product of choice. And if I talk to people about going on TRT, it's the one that I would recommend every single day, even if only one per week, Steve.
All right, and the next one you touched on this earlier is phenylpropionate, 4 to 5 day half-life approximately. This is considered an intermediate option, but it could be considered a short option. Just depends on your mode of thinking. So a popular option is with nandrolone for those who want more flexibility to be on and off quicker. So a lot of people, let's say you want to run DECA, you're like, oh, I want to run DECA, I want to run DECA. And you're like, well, at the same time, I don't want to be shut down for a long period of time. At the same time, I want it in and out of my system quicker. At the same time, I want to only do it 8 to 10 weeks. I don't want to run a longer ester. So for this one, you'll go with the nandrolone phenylpropionate from Euro Pharmacy. So Mobster, tell us what they have when it comes to Deca, the nandrolone phenylpropionate, and tell us what they have when it comes to the um, nandrolone decanate. The decanate, by the way, I'm going to talk about that now. 13 to 16 day half life. This is great for those who hate injection. Now, back in your day, Mobster, injecting was much more taboo. You didn't want to use needles. You wanted to avoid needles, especially in the American culture, because using needles at the time, you were associated with the hippie culture, the drug culture. And a lot
Mm.
of bodybuilders didn't want to be associated with that. They wanted to keep it a more of a clean lifestyle. They didn't want to be associated with living in a tent, with injecting drugs, with having unprotected sex and spreading STDs. So they wanted to keep it clean. So
One of the
yeah,
ones
let
we
me
used to do
finish.
back.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know you want to get in,
go
but
on. Sorry,
yeah,
I've been running. Yeah.
so with the nandrolone decanate, the beauty part, you didn't have to inject it very often. Literally once a week or once every 2 weeks, you'd be perfectly fine using it. But it takes a long time to build up in your system. We're talking 7, 8, 9 weeks. So if you think that you can go and run nandrolone decanate for like 8 weeks or 10 weeks, then you're out of your mind, because it's going to take that long just to reach peak in your system. So again, it's like taking a girl for 10 days on a vacation and only banging her one day, the last day, and then never seeing her again. Don't you want to enjoy her for the full 10 weeks? So
I,
listen, it
I,
doesn't make any sense. So stick, if you want to do a 10 week or shorter run with nandrolone, do the nandrolone phenylpropionate. And then if you want to do 12, 14 weeks or longer, then you do the nandrolone decanate. So, Mobster, touch on
let me talk about the
Euro
products
Pharma.
first
Yeah.
briefly. So, nandrolone decanate from Euro Pharmacies, 250 milligrams a milliliter. It's actually one of my favorites, as you know, Steve. And nandrolone phenylpropionate, which is becoming more and more popular. We see a lot of people loving the flexibility here. 100 milligrams per milliliter. Again, Steve, I'm on TRT. So the idea that I might still have vestes in my system that have built up and taken a long time to clear doesn't fucking matter. It really doesn't. It might arguably matter for health reasons that we talked about earlier on, but in terms of the length of time in my system and clearance times, I'm going back to TRT. So it makes zero difference to me. If you are competing, as I said earlier on, if you are an athlete that's looking to become super ripped in condition, for a photo shoot, for a beach holiday, if you might be tested, it makes absolute sense in that situation to make the right choice. And then that choice might be for you. And we see this, for example, with our Australian buddies that are getting in condition for the beach, etc. Very popular to see nandrolone propionate from Euro Pharmacies, phenylpropionate, should I say, being used in those particular cycles. And again, I think those guys like to see the effect on their system very quickly. They're not getting too out of shape in terms of holding body weight. I'm training specifically for strength rather than aesthetics. So what I want for my strength is not necessarily what they want for a muscular looking physique. And again, that's about making the right choice, picking Euro Pharmacy's products, what you want, Steve. And I'm going to make the point here just to see what Steve thinks about this as well. So this is more of that bro science type stuff and where they may or may not be wrong. And Steve and I can debate this particular point. So there's an argument to be made in what used to be called stickability, Steve. The idea being that gains made from longer cycles were, and I quote here, more likely to stick. In other words, if you gained 10 pounds, you was more likely to keep and retain 6 or 7 pounds, and certainly retain 6 or 7 pounds for a longer period of time versus gaining loads and loads of weight. And in some of the books and stuff that I've been reading recently, Steve was talking about 20 pounds in a month and then saying just how much of that 15 or 20 pounds that you gained would you keep. So talk a little bit, perhaps from the ester point of view again, but also the muscle that's gained slowly versus the muscle that's gained fast, as to whether or not we think there's any kind of science or evidence to back up the idea of short cycles being stickable gains versus long cycles being stickable gains. Because again, for the benefit of our listeners, most of you aren't going to want to gain 10 pounds, look good for 5 minutes, and then lose 10 pounds. You're going to want to gain weight and keep weight. And it's going to be muscular, lean tissue that you're looking to gain. So talk about stickability and whether there's any kind of evidence for either.
Yeah, the problem with both of those arguments, and we'll touch on this in a bit as well, is that, fitness isn't black and white. Fitness is very gray. Bodybuilding is very gray. Steroid use is very gray. Everybody's going to be different. You're going to be different this time. You're going to be different next time. So really, those types of arguments, there's some merit to them, but there's also not some merit to them. So it really just depends. So we can, that'd be a great episode for like, that'd be a great little topic for
Well,
another
let
show.
me give you another one, Steve, and something we've actually discussed on other shows, but we can include it here. Steve talked about how, even just as your example just then, the difference between one athlete and the next, and it's not black and white. It can never be black and white. An example of this that Steve touched upon earlier on is the whole ester thing that we talked about, and specifically, and I'll talk about it from historical as well as what we talk about now. Historically speaking, I've seen examples of scoring systems, and you and I have almost joked about these being wasteful. It's no point. I've got one of Bill Llewellyn's anabolic, whatever the fuck it's called, the encyclopedia, 500 pages, and pretty much every product in there is a scoring system. The ester thing is really annoying insofar as that we will see one article give a product 10-day half-life, another article 15-day half-life, and so on and so forth. And here's why it's kind of almost sometimes a waste of time. At best, these esters half-life and clearance times and the way that things are going to affect a person are based on an ideal, really kind of lean already individual. The problem is very few of us, and especially the average person listening to this show, is exactly the same. Just by way of an example, Steve and I differ in height by something like 8 to 10 inches and in body weight by probably over 100 pounds. So the idea that Steve and I would have the exact same response to a steroid, and even if it was the exact same ester of a steroid, for example, ACE, is ridiculous. My body fat levels are almost certainly higher than Steve's. So even if I was Steve's height and Steve's weight, but my body fat levels are higher, my response to and my ability to clear a steroid from my system would be different. And that's without getting into specific genetics.
And your reactions to, starting a cycle versus in the middle of a cycle
Yes.
versus the end of the cycle is going to be very different
Yes.
too. Because you might notice at the beginning of a cycle, you're able to make a lot more gains, but then you hit a
Yes.
wall during your cycle, you have
I
to.
train, as I've said many times, for strength, with muscle being a bonus, and Steve's way more, not completely, but way more focused on the aesthetic and a level of fitness that comes with that aesthetic look. So what we're aiming for, if I get fitness benefits, if I get an aesthetic look, that's great. But it's not the focus of why I train, the focus of why I use it. The example I give sometimes, and again, this applies to all our listeners, I think, is that we all have the advantage of going to the same big fuck off toolbox of PEDs. We all have the same access. We all have the same reference point, including these shows for information. But what we want from that toolbox and how we use those tools to create the physique or to get stronger is what differs. And we must understand that when we do these shows, we can only generalize in terms of half-lives. We can only generalize in terms of response because you, the listener, should be your own unique individual with specific responses and specific looks and what you're aspiring to when you go to the gym, when you're using these PDs. So when we talk about these shorter cycles and long cycles, you might have a specific reason for doing that. There might be some approach that you're talking about, but we try to, as best we possibly can, not just opinion, but try to, as best we possibly can, give some sort of scientific insight. And again, like I said, Steve, just as by way of an example again, I've literally read 2 books in the last week. I'm halfway through another one, and I've already started on the fourth. And there are whole elements of those books, and these are all written 20 years ago. There are whole elements where I go, well, that's wrong. You're not even spelling sustanon correctly. Why would you only do that and then only have that short period of time off? The health thing is almost not
Speaking
mentioned.
of that, let's talk about sustanon a little bit. Let's also talk
Yeah,
about
yeah,
undecanate. And
yeah.
undecanate is got a 25 to 30 day half-life. Yes, I said that right. 25 to 30 day half-life. So this is great.
Look at examples so sorry with the undecanate, and I talked about this on a recent show where I said that the NHS and I believe one other country, so the NHS is the health service in the UK, give 1,000 milligrams every 6 weeks of the longest ester that you possibly can. That's a hell of a pin, Steve, even if it's 3 or 4 mil, and
Well, you
that's
don't have
once
to
every
pin
six
it all
weeks.
at one time. You can just pin
No,
like
but
you can
that's what
pin
they're
within
doing.
you could do
That's
three
what they.
different
You don't have to.
injections.
I don't have to. But that's what the NHS are doing. I believe the other place, if you can get a doctor to prescribe it, was Australia, where they're doing it every 8 weeks. But again, it's just for TRT
Yeah.
purposes. It's not
So
no way we
so
use
we
it.
call it Nebido in America, and it's you only have to inject this once every 1 to 3 months. I've seen 14 weeks, 10 to 14 weeks has been the average. So this is a great option for those of you who made the commitment. Hey, I'm just going to go on TRT for life, and I don't want to have to inject every week. I don't want to have to inject every 2 weeks. I don't want to even have to inject every month. I can inject every 2 to 3 months. Isn't that beautiful? Then you can just have it in your system, but you got to do a large volume, like Mobster said, a large volume at once. And the ester slow releases, just like when you go to the drugstore and you get the Mucinex. You have the 24-hour Mucinex, you got the 48-hour Mucinex, you got the 72-hour Mucinex. Okay, what is the difference between the three? The 72 hours is slow release. It's going to be in your system longer. The 24-hour though is going to hit your system quicker, but it's going to be out of your system. So you could go to sleep on the 24-hour Mucinex and then wake up very congested because it's out of your system. But the 72-hour will still be in your system, so you don't have to take it, get up during the night to take it, for example. It's the same thing with this. So really, this is a poor choice for those of you who want any type of flexibility. It's a poor choice for those of you who want to
Yes.
cycle. It's a poor choice for most of you out there, except for those of you who are on TRT for life. You're never
Mm.
coming off and you're committed 100% to it. You can go ahead and use this. And Euro Pharmacies does have a 200 milligram milliliter. Although it may not be in stock at this time, they do have it and they do bring that back in stock. Let me finish out
Let
with
me get.
sustenance.
Yeah,
We got to
yeah.
finish
Sorry.
with.
Yeah. Talk about sustanon, and I'm going to talk about the peaks and troughs that some people experience using certain PDs as well.
We're talking about sustenance now. It's a mix of four esters. And look, sustenance is very misunderstood. It's made up mostly of intermediate or long esters, and you should treat it that way. So pinning, the way it was designed is you pin it every 2 to 3 weeks, but you pin a larger amount. So you pin more, less frequently, and each ester picks up after another. Now we've had discussions on the forum about this. People can point to websites that show the fluctuations and all this, but at the end of the day, look, I've looked at the blood work, guys. I've looked at the blood work. I've looked at more blood work than anybody out there throughout history because I have a blood work thread where people have posted their blood work and they've PM'd me their blood work. And I offer that on the forum. You can literally go on there and post up your blood work, and I'll actually analyze your blood work for free if you post on there. This way, it helps other people. This way, I don't get bombarded with the same questions 100 times a day, which same questions. Oh, my blood work says this, my blood work says this. Post your blood work Block out your name, and I will actually analyze it for you for free. But that's besides the point. I've looked at more blood work. Sustanon, you do not have to pin Sustanon every day or every other day. Okay? You don't have to pin Sustanon twice a week. You don't have to pin Sustanon once a week. You only have to pin Sustanon every 2 to 3 weeks. It was designed that way. It was designed for TRT. So it is a poor choice for those of you who want to run a short cycle. And it's probably not even a good choice for those of you who want to run a long cycle because you lose all flexibility when you're using it. So it's kind of like it's like having four girlfriends, Mobster. Okay. The Sustanon is four girlfriends. You're gonna bang one of those girls every other day. That's the short ester that's included. That's the prop that's in the Sustanon. Then it's got two intermediate esters. You're gonna bang those girls twice a week. And it's got the long decanate ester included. You're gonna bang that girl once every 15 or 16 days. So you can't bang them all at once. You got to bang them separately, but you're going to bang them at different intervals. And at the end of the day, after 10 weeks, you're going to bang, the girl, you're going to bang the prop girl more often than you bang the
that,
decanate
that that
girl.
that
You
sounds
see?
like real life, Steve, not the brag. But
Well,
I agree with.
it helps in Britain that you can pay for it
Well,
legally.
no, I have for a very brief period of time enjoyed exactly what Steve says, but that's more. And again, it was for a very short period of time. In reality, Steve is exactly right. So, I mean, again, flexibility. Steve's correct. This is actually, arguably, ironically, one of my favorite testosterones, and especially now that I'm on TRT. Uh, and let me just read the numbers out for the benefit of the listeners here, Steve. Sustanon 250, which is 250 milligrams a milliliter, and that consists of testosterone propionate 30 milligrams, testosterone phenylpropionate 60 milligrams, testosterone isocaprionate, I hope I said that correctly, 60 milligrams, and testosterone decanate 100 milligrams. And again, ironically, the decanate at the end there, Steve. So it's one of those situations where it benefits me. I don't mind the fact that it's in my system longer. But again, if you do want that flexibility, it would make no sense. Perhaps at the beginning of a longer cycle, just so that you've got something there going on and working its magic. And then if you do want flexibility, shorter esters towards the end. And again, for that particular reason. Let me talk about something else here, Steve. And again, this is one of those short cycles, longer cycle arguments, but also shorter ester, longer ester arguments, okay? And making, again, the right choice of what you're going to do for you. And it's, again, that perhaps arguable the way that our body responds. So that will differ. And you must know as a listener, if you're going to do this, a little bit of experience before you go into the cycle. Realistically, I don't want beginners doing short cycles equally and high at a high level, high intensity. And I don't want new cycle users doing 20, 25 week cycles. I'd much rather you do 4 to 8 weeks or 8 to 12 weeks with very, very simple, very straightforward, and if need be, short resters only, just to gain experience of knowing how your body works. So one of the things that sometimes comes up, Steve, is what we call peaks and troughs. So certain forum members will talk about pinning short resters into the belly, for example, on a regular basis. And they would describe, and again, it must be specific to them individually, how if they use a product as intended, as normally guided, for example, a Monday injection and a Thursday injection, or just to use the TRT example that we gave earlier on, Steve, with the very long esters, I can't imagine taking something that's going to be, I'm only going to inject every 8 weeks and thinking that the day after the injection, I should feel like I'm on TRT. But I can only imagine that in 8 fucking weeks' time, or even 6 weeks' time, I'm going to feel like there's no testosterone in my system at all the day before I go for my next joint 1,000 milligram injection. I can't imagine, and that's just me as a person who doesn't have those peaks and troughs typically. I would normally do TRT once a week. For me, that's Monday evening. And equally, there are people that are users of testosterone out there that will say that they will literally feel the difference from one day to the next. Now, I have pointed this out, that in nature, you aren't in a constant state of testosterone. It's literally one of the hormones that wakes you up in the morning is a testosterone peak. It drops through the day, and then I believe there are two miniature peaks, one typically mid-morning, one late afternoon. These are within a couple of hours of sunrise and a couple of hours of sunset. That's perfectly normal. That's how nature works. Gets you out of bed in the morning before the sun comes up, gives you the energy to kick ass at work in the middle of the morning, especially after your first coffee, and gives you the ability, as for most listeners, to go to the gym around 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, early evening, and kick ass in the gym. And that's how your body works in nature. So the idea that you're in some sort of constant state, it doesn't make sense. Equally, there are users of testosterone that will swear blind, Steve, that the idea of microdosing, as many call it, or using shorter esters more frequently, which would be microdosing really, because you can do the same thing with a longer ester if you chose to. I don't see the peaks and troughs, but some users do. They will tell you absolutely, hand on a religious book, I feel the difference from day to day. And if I'm on more frequent pinning, or if I'm on more frequent pinning specifically of the short esters, I feel better in that particular regards. I would argue that there might be super lean, sensitive to testosterone, sensitive even to the blends that they're using, that there might be other medication that they're on that they conditionally might be in better condition than me. And equally, and I've even talked about is the difference between what we call low TRT guys, because again, it's usually men, and high TRT guys. And someone who's naturally got high testosterone levels will probably notice a difference when they start to use injectables, purely and simply because their own testosterone production is suppressed, versus someone that's low TRT and just put them on, low testosterone typically, and then put them on TRT. Those guys can transform. And even at a low dose of 200 milligrams a week, less, they can feel like supermen compared to how they felt before. So what do you think about the peaks and troughs analogy in terms of how people feel versus, and I've argued this as well, Steve, I say sometimes it doesn't matter how you feel in terms of on or off testosterone. It
Yeah.
should matter in
I
terms of
think
your
it's
health, and it should matter in
overrated
terms of your results. Yeah,
because if you get a lousy night of sleep, that can
yeah.
cause you to feel like shit. If you are going through a sickness, it can make you feel like shit. If your body's just
Stressful
exhausted,
situations, Steve. Divorce, house move. Steve just done a house move. You're not going to feel great regardless of the level of
yeah.
testosterone.
Well,
Equally,
the
it's something
mistake.
else, Steve. Something else as well. Listen, right? We diet, so we could be hungry. We could be doing more cardio. We could be training our
So
asses off.
yeah,
We
let
could
me
be killing it in
answer.
the
Yeah.
gym.
So let me answer. Yeah, let me answer. So let's say hypothetically, you run a cycle for 12 weeks, and you're using Europharmacy, testosterone enanthate. You're using Europharmacy, trenbolone acetate, and you're like, wow, I feel great. I'm doing great. Blah blah blah. You come off whatever, and then 6 months later, you run the same exact cycle. You're not going to have the same exact experience as the first one. It's going to be different. Things are going to be different. You may not get as much results the second time around. You may get more results. You may, during that cycle, end up with the flu, and you may feel sick that whole time where you're not able to get results. You may not be getting enough sleep the second time and get less results. So things are going to happen. So at the end of the day, this is why we don't run one cycle, two cycles, three cycles, and call it a day. Most of you are going to run your first cycle, and then you're going to be gearing up for your second run, and then their third one, and your fourth one, and so on. So you keep going. It's a lifelong battle. It's a constant struggle. It's a struggle with the diet. It's a struggle with the training. So all this has to, come together for you to get the best results. And you're not going to have the same results on every cycle. It's impossible because your body's constantly changing. You've got body memory, you got muscle memory. You and your buddy could be same exact diet, train together every workout. He runs the exact same cycle as you do. Both of you run Euro pharmacies. You're the same gear, but both of you are going to have different results. He may increase his bench if you're training for strength. He may increase his bench a lot, while you may increase your deadlifts a lot. He may, grow his calves like you will never believe, and you may have skinny ass calves. Everybody's different. Everybody has different genetics. Everyone has different experiences, and you have different histories. I used to know a guy, he grew up on a farm eating nothing but fresh organic fruits, vegetables, and protein. And this guy was an absolute fucking machine as an adult. He was an absolute machine. Anything he would do, he would excel at. If he did powerlifting, he'd excel. If he did bodybuilding, he'd excel. If he did running, he'd excel. No matter what he would do, he'd excel. While other people struggle. So maybe it was because he grew up eating such a strong diet that now as an adult, that was an investment into his body. And now as an adult, he's been successful. I know people who struggle as adults. They're sick all the time. They're overweight. They can't get it out of their own way, no matter what they try, because they grew up eating like shit. Both their parents are type 2 diabetics. Both their parents are obese. Both their parents are sick. Both their parents have cancer. Both their parents have every disease under the sun. They're on every drug under the sun. They're not healthy. So they grew up eating a poor diet. So these are things beyond our control, guys. We can't control what our parents fed us when we were kids. We can't control a lot of stuff. But now, as an adult, you can control what you can control. So instead of worrying about why am I not gaining as much as my gym buddy? Why am I not doing this? Why am I doing that? You just got to go out there and do your very best and be at your very best. And you have to run these compounds correctly to get the most out
Yes.
of them. You should have to have a plan. So let's talk about short cycle, long cycle example, Mobster. We have some time left. Give us your favorite short cycle of all time that you've run, and then give
Okay.
us your favorite long cycle of all time that you run, and tell us the how much you ran and how long you ran them.
Right. So I'm thinking short cycle. I said at the beginning of the show, I've done multiple in the last few years, 4 to 8 week cycles. A short cycle, very effective, very straightforward. All only would be 30 to 50 milligrams, probably 50 milligrams a day, Steve, Vanavar, or my early 4 to 8 weeks, mostly 8 week cycles of Dynabol, 30 milligrams a day. Long, I have run one, I mean one, 16-week cycle because I did two back-to-back strength competitions in the thing that I was competing in. And I'm thinking around that time, Steve, I think there might have been a little bit of Anavar, but those were almost certainly sustained on the Deca cycles. And as I said before, off the top of my head, I believe you're looking at a combined total between the two of 765 milligrams a week. I have to say, I hated running 16 weeks. The huge and great majority of my cycles now are 4 to 8 weeks at the most, and that suits my lifestyle. And again, I'm on TRT. I would still use Anavar in there occasionally. I occasionally use SARMs. I still have a foundational fave of the Sasteca cycles. I don't think, for example, and I've mentioned this just to finish on my point, that the height of 153 kilograms or 336 pounds and change, which followed, ironically, a 4 week cut and it went straight into a 4 week bulk. I don't think that's going to happen again because I've actually used more of the same products since and still not gone back up to that body weight. So, yeah, definitely things change over time. What about you, Steve, in terms of short and long cycles?
So my favorite short was Anadrol. I did 50 milligrams a day for 4 weeks. I blew up. I got stronger. I blew up and I got harder. Anadrol is a hell of a steroid, but it has a lot of side effects. My favorite long cycle that I did, I like that one that you said, the Deca Sustanon. That's a good
Yeah.
one. But also for me, it was Trenbolone E and T-Bowl for 10 weeks. And I hit all-time PRs on that stack. I
Yeah.
hit PRs with weight and I hit PR with strength. So Trenbolone is an awesome one. And using the NNT
I'm
after you
just
get.
thinking one of your worst cycles and I can't remember if it was a short or long one. Steve was using Superdrug. Was that a short or long cycle?
Yeah, I used Superdrol for I tried for 4 weeks, but I couldn't make it,
Yeah.
for more than 3 weeks. I had to stop taking it. So Superdrol, yeah, that's definitely the worst. But yeah, we're talking about our favorites, yeah, but like least
Yes. Yes.
favorite would be Superdrol. So Superdrol is one of those you definitely want to stick to a short cycle, obviously, with Superdrol. So it seems like the more toxic steroids you want to keep more short. And
Yes.
then you can be more flexible with some of the more mild options where you run them more long. So that would be something to think about as well when you're planning a cycle. Do I want to run something that's very toxic? Okay, well, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to stick to more of a short cycle.
Yeah.
But if I want to run something more mild, I can plan to run it more longer. So that's a good way to kind of approach these things. And look, no matter
Absolutely.
what
Yeah.
what you think, you've got to understand that the longer you stay on these, the more the side effects build and build and build.
Yes. I
And
was going to use the
the
phrase here,
damage
Steve,
is being
risk. Yeah.
done whether you
Yes.
think you feel it or not. The damage is still being
Yes.
done internally. And you'll notice your blood pressure gradually increases, your blood gradually thickens. So things are happening in your body, whether you want to acknowledge it or not. So don't get greedy.
I think there's an argument to be made here for what's called risk versus reward. And for the most part, the milder short slash medium cycles seem to be the most effective for most people in terms of risk versus reward. And again, that's coming down to, and again, look, if we were Mr. Olympias, if we were IFBB pros, the risk versus reward changes because the reward for us being bigger and muscular and stronger and leaner is literally money in the fucking bank. But for the vast majority of us, it's how many pounds of muscle can I put on? How good can I look on the beach? And you don't need to be using grams and grams and grams for months at a time of high risk steroids for you to be able to do that. Look, guys, when it talks about we say Euro pharmacies on this show because we have both used Euro pharmacies products. We know how these products work for us. We know how these products have worked for us in the past, how they're going to work for us now, and they allow us, with the choices that they give us and make available to us, to be able to choose the appropriate steroid, short ester or long ester version for the cycle that we're about to do. Hopefully, we didn't confuse you too much with the examples that we've given you by making sure that you use the right Europharmacist products for the cycle that you're about to do. There will be some grey area in terms of how you specifically individually respond, but hopefully there's enough information in there for you to understand that for the great and vast majority of you, the choices that are available to you are there so that you can make the right choice in the cycle, in the stack you're doing, that's appropriate to your situation, to your body fat levels, to you wanting to gain muscle or wanting to get stronger or wanting to run longer distances, for example, with T-ball, like Steve said, and so on and so forth. Make sure that the right product is being used by you. Does it need to be a 25-week cycle? Probably not. Does it need to be halo tested or trend for weeks and weeks and weeks at a time in a shorter cycle? No. And it doesn't need to be thousands and thousands of milligrams. Again, for the great and vast majority of you, less will be more, and that applies to both time on and also to dosages. But Europharmacist has got you covered. Please note,
Let's talk about
yeah,
Euro Pharma as we finish out. And look, they've been around for let me start. They've been around for 2 decades, providing high quality products, guys. And look, at the end of the day, they have everything. We went over so many different esters. Many of these esters you'll probably never use in your lifetime. I've
yep,
never used testosterone base, but maybe I will down the line at some point. I've never
yep,
used testosterone undecanate, but maybe I will one day when I decide to go TRT. Maybe Mobster will change his mind and start using it for TRT. Like at the end of the day, they have it all. And one of the things that they do really good is they provide things no matter what your situation, whether you're just a gym rat, whether you're a weekend
yep,
warrior who just wants to use steroids and try them out, or whether you're a professional bodybuilder. Whether you're a powerlifter, bodybuilder, aesthetic, no matter what you're trying to accomplish, they have you covered. They have all the ancillaries that you need. They have your
yep.
PCT products on cycle, off cycle. So that's where
We
they
just
really
spoke
shine.
about the injectables, as say, Steve. Didn't talk about orals or SARMs, all the ancillaries that Steve's talked about. We didn't touch upon their growth hormone or other products that they've got, the GLP products that they now source as well. We literally just gave you the injectables only, Steve.
Yeah. So talk about Eurofarmer for a little bit, Mobster.
Yeah, look, as I said just now, Steve, you and I have both used these products. I'm literally looking at the testosterone enanthate of theirs on the desk. I'm still using right this minute. We can't get it anymore, so it's no longer supplied. The Sustanon 500 milligram product that's also on my desk. My go-to for TRT is their Cyprinate. Why is that? I discuss Europharmacies as a no frills brand. It does what it says on the tin, as one of the adverts here in the UK used to tell you for DIY products, and specifically meaning it doesn't have to be crazy, doesn't have to be rare, doesn't have to be exotic. It has to work. It has to be clean. There should be zero or negligible PIP. You need to know, for example, as Steve said earlier on, that the brand that you're using has been around for a long time. This is not a Johnny come Steve. This is, as Steve said, a 20-year plus brand. We know where the products are produced. We know the conditions those products are produced in. We know that they test regularly. We know that they fix issues within 5 minutes of there being an issue. We know that they're updating their brand, their product line, the products that are available constantly. I love the 15 mil vials. I've got loads of the 15 mil vials here. But unfortunately, the 15 mil vials didn't sell to the mass market. So they've dropped the 15 mil vials and they've gone back to what people want, which is the 10 mil vials. And they would do this all the time. They've literally asked people, listeners like you, buyers of their product, what people want to see in those products. And then they've gone out of the way to produce that product. So you know that the biggest sellers, the best PEDs, the ones that give you the best bang for their buck are absolutely what Euro Pharma is going to produce for you. And again, they've been tested in-house by secondary labs and by customers like yourself just this week. We are recording this show on a Thursday, and there is a result of a product being tested, put up on one of the forums this Monday. Primo Depot was the product that was being tested by a customer. So that's the reasons why we like Euro Pharmacists using them right now. Steve's used them in the past. We love them for that particular reason because we know the results we're going to get. And when we talk about PED experience, this is the sort of thing that we mean. Products that work, that we know that we're going to get results from. Please note, as always, we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. Is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcast of informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.